Hello and good evening. And thank you very much for being here this evening. It's 5:30 and it's really it's kind of end of the day for many of us. And it's a great time to kind of forget the morning and focus on learning a little bit. And so thank you for coming in here and investing your time with us. I'm Bharti Chaturvedi and I'm part of Chintan. And I'm really excited about welcoming all of you on behalf of both Chintan as well as our partner Friedrich Ebert Stiftung to discuss today the theme waste, which is an index of a failed economic system. And I think this is particularly interesting, both for Chintan and for the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and or the FES. And the FES is a non-profit German foundation committed to the values of democracy and social justice. And with this webinar series, FES is creating a nuanced and progressive discourse for social, economic, and ecological transformation with gender justice and climate change at its core. And that is exactly how we would like to frame economic theory here and waste as an index of its failure. What we're really trying to nudge all of you to think is that if there's materials which have been mined and they're lying everywhere and they're burning on our landfills and they're poisoning the air and they're giving at this point the poor a livelihood which they have to struggle for, and which sometimes can have terrible impact on their health, then in fact is that a sign of a failed economy or a successful economy? And what is an economy that is successful? Is it an economy where we're able to fight climate change, where we have gender justice, where the poorest of our people also have a basic standard of living? Or is it something that's going to be extractive and GDP based and based on how much we shop and how much we discard? So this is the second in a 6-part series, and you will find a huge number of really exciting speakers as we go ahead. But for today, we're going to give each panelist a brief presentation and opportunity to share their perspective. And then we'll open out the floor so that you can ask very specific questions. And we were very lucky. We have a fabulous panel, and I really want to thank all of them because they're from different time zones, and for many of them, they've woken up quite early. And some of our panelists weren't particularly well, and they were still absolutely determined to be here. And very importantly is moderator Dharmesh Shah. And many of you might know Dharmesh. Dharmesh has been a big ally and supporter of our work and these issues more importantly. He's a public policy researcher interested in waste, air pollution, and health. And he's been a policy advisor to the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives and Chennai-based Community Environmental Monitoring. And he's been a member of the Household Waste Partnership, which was established under the UN Basel Convention. Dharmesh now lives in rural Kerala, and we're really grateful that he's been able to find the time, and we're really grateful to the diversity of panelists here today. So over to you, Dharmesh.
Thank you so much, Bharti, for that lovely introduction. And just to kind of add to what you said, I think a new way of doing business is, and by that extension of living, is no longer a choice, because we have to reinvent the way we're doing business. So circular economy might just be that next step that we need to take. And if done right and as envisaged, I think a circular economy is perhaps at the heart of solutions that we seek to some of the major problems that we're facing right now. And you mentioned climate change, but I'd also like to add biodiversity loss, which is one of the major issues facing humanity right now. And in Indian context, air pollution. So I think circular economy going forward, I think is going to, and if you get it right, then it could really solve a lot of the issues that we're facing right now. With that, I think I will just like to introduce our first panelist, Mr. Prabjot Sodhi, who is the UNDP India head for circular economy. He assumes his duties for this project in January 2018, leading a team of 60 multidisciplinary colleagues and working with multiple donors in space of circular economy, plastics, especially focus on plastics. And he's been working with several corporations, including Coca-Cola, Hindustan Lever, HDFC Bank, and Coca-Cola Foundation. Prior to this, he was a country program manager for Global Environment Facility, UNDP Small Grants Program for 14 years. He was a program manager for Department for International Development, or DFID, UK, and the Government of India in CRIPCO for a period of 13 years. He also holds a rich experience in shipping and fertilizer industry. Mr. Sodhi has a diversified experience in leading and implementing projects in a wide range of areas: plastic waste management to climate change, natural resource, land development to livelihoods of poor and marginalized in the tribal, rural, and urban spaces for the last 38 years. He's a passionate, open, and reflective individual. Mr. Sodhi received his undergraduate degree in BSc from Punjab University and postgraduate degree in business administration from Punjab University, Patiala. He has also undertaken courses in sustainable development, gender, and development policy from University of Wales, Swansea, UK. Over to you, Mr. Sodhi. Look forward to hearing from you.
A very good evening and good morning to all the colleagues who have joined in, as Bharti echoed. Thank you very much, Dharmesh, for the kind words. I'll straight get into the words for the day. I just want to bring everybody onto the board and thanks. I must also thank Chintan and FES for giving me the opportunity to be with you for this time. Before I go into asking the colleague to play the film, I want to say a few words that, you heard UN just celebrated on 24th, the 75th year of formation, and the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres made an important thought process which goes with each one of you, that today we are really faced with climate calamities that looms us, biodiversity collapsing, hatred is pressing, poverty is rising, geopolitical tensions, and many others. But don't lose hope. There is transformational changes being brought in the technologies and the ways of working, which is setting up new opportunities all across the globe. Even though we have a challenge in COVID, but still the people have found their ways to really link and check. But we are faced with one real issue, that is discrimination, of course, in various ways and forms. But the real challenge is that plastics has captured the world attention. And when we talk about plastics, what we are saying is that the production is rising. It continues to grow. So does the problem. So there are people in this panel who are practically addressing these issues. And there is scientific research which points that we need to reduce the growing plastic pollution, both on land and in oceans. So I think what I'll ask you is that colleagues who are handling this, Samuel, to play the video where we will give you a live example of what we are doing in the space of plastic waste management. And I must also add, please start the video. I must also add that we have not started plastic today because it is hot. UNDP is working from last 10 to 12 years in the space of management and operations of the thin and multi-layered, particularly, which is a challenge. Over to Samuel to start the film.
And this number is on a rise. India, the world's biggest democracy, is facing an increase in waste generation due to its massive economic growth, urbanization, and growing consumption. And nothing represents this scenario more vividly than India's financial capital, Mumbai. Home to numerous restaurants, factories, offices, industries, and 21 million people, Mumbai generates a massive 7,500 tons of solid waste per day, and this number is on a rise. What this means is there's a need to strengthen the existing waste management systems, and quickly. To deal with this issue, UNDP India, in partnership with the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai and Hindustan Unilever, took a small step towards sustainable, decentralized waste management, Swachhata Kendra. It is a one-of-a-kind example of a circular economy in Mumbai. It links collection, segregation, and processing of waste with citizens, municipal corporation, waste pickers, and recyclers as the partners. The Mumbai model starts with citizens segregating their waste right at the source: kitchen waste, dry waste, and domestic hazardous waste. The project team regularly educates and encourages residents to segregate waste properly. With activities like route mapping, conducting baselines, capacity building for waste pickers, or the Safai Sathis for on-ground waste collection, the model strengthens the MCGM's current waste collection mechanism. While the collected wet and domestic hazardous waste is disposed safely and responsibly, the dry waste is collected by the Safai Sathis of Asra Welfare Association and brought to the Swachhata Kendra. Here, Safai Sathis and several machines sort and process the plastic waste and other dry waste. It is then collected by the recyclers to produce recycled products. Not only does the model add value to the waste, this project has successfully improved the lives of over 500 Safai Sathis by increasing their income, connecting them to government social schemes, bank accounts, and availing health checkups. With over 33,000 households now connected to the project, it has been able to collect 2,500 tons of plastic waste in just a year. For the next 4 years, the mission is to divert 35,000 plus tons of plastic waste in Mumbai towards recycling and also improve the socio-economic conditions of 4,000 plus of Safai Sathis, not just in Mumbai, but across India. This is just the beginning. It is only through meaningful partnerships, continued efforts, and passion for the cause that we will be able to ensure that waste is put where it truly belongs. That is, in the circular economy where it can be reduced, reused, and recycled.
Thank you. So what I will do is I'll take you through little slides of mine, which I have put together. So you saw the film and you really saw the points which we were trying to make forward is a link in between the production, which is where the waste is coming, and the consumption, which we are all ending up, and how on the waste management, and then how the secondary raw materials, which are then segregated into more than 40 to 50 fractions, and then using the innovative investments and monitoring systems of traceability and accountability, we get to recovery of energy or the waste disposal system, which are phased out, which are otherwise unavoidable. So what we are really trying to talk with the corporates with whom we are working, as you saw, Coca-Cola, HDFC, Dharmesh mentioned the point, and Hindustan Unilever, and the Coca-Cola Foundation. The whole approach to business is how the material cost savings can happen and increase their profits through innovative business models and through reverse logistics, which they have now started using as a technique which is already existing all over the world. So we want to move towards a zero waste economy, what Bharti really said it in the beginning. The consumption is increasing in terms of plastic and the materialistic world of ours. But at the same time, we have to match the other and balance it to really get to the recycling and recovery. I will take you through the model which you have already seen. One is to link a partnership with the ULBs. In our model, we are not trying to establish a system where we have a parallel system to the already existing. Under the court of law, the government of India has established the ULB system, which is the urban local bodies, and the informal sector exists there. But we are also focusing on how we can have these decentralized material recovery facilities where the waste can be brought from various channels and can be given a value addition, and the whole material flow can then be linked to the recyclers and less to the landfills. We are putting a very strong emphasis to the point which was earlier mentioned, that is these Swachh Safai Sathis. What we are trying to say here is that we want to build an emphasis on their inclusive growth and giving them identity in the space. The last, which the model thought process is that since it is under the compliance activity of the corporates, we have a very strong focus on the material flow traceability, giving an investment in the small NGOs or recyclers, how they can build it up. So taking it forward, I'll take you through another slide. As and when we enter into a city, the major emphasis into the city is to link it up with the city municipal corporation and then taking a city implementing partner. It can be an NGO, it can be Chintan in a city. They are anyway our partners in one of the places. The city implementing partner really plays the major role. There, where we enter into an agreement with the city implementing partner and the municipal corporation is linked into it, the whole range of stakeholders on policy making, the urban development departments, the municipal corporations, the state pollution control boards, and the environment departments are bringing in a constant policy link to the project. The city partner then starts to handle the Swachhata Kendra, which is the recovery facility, and this recovery facility, the materials are going, sorting into more than 30, 40, 50 fractions, and each of them then go to their various recyclers. Connect to that is linking the loop chain and then reducing the virgin plastic inflow. Baling, shredding, and various sort of machines are being used. But while we are doing this, we are also making the standard operational guidelines. So to capture the circular economy benefits, what we are trying to push with the businesses is to see the knowledge exists in the domain with the business and industry. But that knowledge needs to create the opportunities for the people down the line who are managing this flow. The collaborations need to be made in understanding what the role of each of the stakeholders is in order to really see that the emphasis go. The small NGOs, this trade of informal sector is all informal, unstructured, and we are trying to bring standard operation guidelines into it so that things can happen more systemically. And the resources are finite. We all understand we don't want to get into toxic returns, but balance the ecosystem. We are also talking with government all the time in creating regulatory framework which matter. The EPR system has come into picture, and most of the EPR companies are working through PROs who are working with the ULBs and not with the ULBs. The whole idea is to create a space of togetherness and ensure platform for multi-stakeholder collaborators so that we can move into systems of circularity in public procurement and in infrastructure also in that manner. So I'll take you to the next slide, which really shows you how we work. In a city, plastic manufacturers bring the plastic through the consumer brand owners, and they end up with waste generators at different places. Now, what happens is that there are two ways of collection system. One is the municipal waste value chain. The other is the informal waste value chain. So the municipal waste value chain, the collection system takes place and it goes to a landfill. What we are saying is, let's bring it to a material recovery center. In a city like Mumbai, we can have 50 such centers. Each ward is a city in itself. There are about 26, 24 wards in Mumbai, and each is equivalent to a city. And each is subdivided I gave you the example of the film in Mumbai, so I'm trying to link it there. So there, these material recovery centers can be established and the materials can flow in. The other informal sector, right now the system goes is they send it to kabadiwalas and the wholesaler, and then it goes to the recycler. This chain has been working very well in India, but this chain needs to be strengthened in terms of mechanical and the traceability and the accounting principles, because we need to give it a more transparent ways of working. In these sort of material recovery centers, we are also putting registration of the waste pickers. When we mean registrations, we are giving them identity cards, we are linking them through health insurances, we are linking them to medical insurances, pension schemes, and lot of other inclusive growth schemes under the Government of India's social and welfare. So the idea behind this is to integrate this whole collection, segregation, recycling, and then linking the policy across. I'll take you through how we engage with the ULBs is we do a MOA, we do an MOU or MOA or a letter of intent, whatever you say, in defining the responsibilities between the project and the ULB, so that there is a combined effort which takes place. Take you to another. How does the Swachhata Kendra look like, or a material recovery facility? It sets in a 5,000 to 10,000 square feet area. We bring all the little machines so that there is an absolute traceability, weigh bridges, put conveyor belts, easing out the sorting simply. There are air blower machines, there are shredding, there are eglos and extruders, and there are weighing machines, electronic weigh machines, so that anybody who comes, the material can be properly weighed and the payments can properly be made. We are not trying to encourage the cash payments every day, but we are trying to open the bank accounts of the people which you saw in the film. And those people who were bereft of all these, and provide them with basic safe drinking water, toilets, and safe working environment, which is mostly missing in this whole system. So the emphasis of UNDP in partnership with all these business and industry is to focus on this. Would you believe that we have done about 51,000 tons of collection in about 15 months, and we cut across 30 different municipal corporations in the country, in 35 cities. It is increasing. More and more partners are joining up, and we wish that this catches up through number of people. I would like to also say that the proposal is the value proposition to create a link and an informal network between the implementing partners in the city, the informal waste pickers, the institutions and citizens, recycling industry, government, and the producers. So the whole connect between all this is to the project's focus, creating that loop of circularity. This is how materials we are linking up styrofoam, which is one of the biggest issue. And this is one of the live example of one of the places in Ahmedabad where we have put these mechanicals and the people are being used, safe environments are being given. The project is really linking up into, out of the 17 goals, it is creating cross-cutting opportunities and contributes towards 14 of the different goals, where some of them are giving increased income to waste pickers, some are empowering the women waste pickers, gender and equality, what Bharti initially said that. And some places we are also hitting at the innovation in technology, energy recovery, and extended producer liabilities, reducing landfills, and of course, above all, reduction in greenhouse gases. Because the thin and multi-layer which we are picking, it goes in, you can see there are a number of people who are getting involved. They are very passionate about things. The whole idea is to celebrate the dignity for these and respectfulness between the citizens for the waste pickers, whom we call Safai Sathis. We don't like this word rag pickers and waste pickers, but certainly Safai Sathis. They are a part of this who are really helping us. Today, the world has recognized, COVID has given them a new name as waste warriors, and children are equally involved in the schools and colleges, and we are bringing more and more products to be made through this. This is all multi-layered and thin plastics which is being put together, and these are the products which are outcoming. A lot of testing is going on with the organizations in country. I would just close here in giving you feel that this is the partners who are helping us to really take it forward. There are many other silent partners in this, our implementing partners, NGOs and companies, and various community-based organizations who are filling the need in the whole loop. Over to Dharmesh. Thank you very much, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sodi. Very interesting presentation. You finished before time, which is very, very good. As a moderator, my life is easier. So I'll move on to the next presentation, Dr. Guillermo J. Roman, who is an international practitioner on waste management and sustainability. Dr. Roman's work in the last 10 years encompass the design, development, and evaluation of projects of national scale implementation for waste management plastics, e-waste, and persistent organic pollutants through socio-technic approaches and business models in countries such as India, Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador, Mexico, and Paraguay. His consulting experience on waste management, eco-efficiency, recycling, and environmental impact assessment extends to 30 years in collaboration in over 120 projects for government, international organizations like UNDP, UNIDO, UNEP, USAID, Ministry of Switzerland, and Government of Switzerland, and private industry. His proposals have generated over $57 million US dollars in funding to implement projects in these countries. Over to you, Dr. Guillermo.
Thank you. Good morning from Mexico. A greeting from Mexico. It is early in the morning here, and good evening to you. I am glad to be back again in India, although it is by through this informatic way, because I have been to your country a few times, and I would say I feel proud to be participating with Mr. Sodi G on the development of this so successful project, which may be iconic in the world. Actually, my professional life started on the extractive side. On the extractive side, I studied metallurgy, and if you, I did my first studies in London in Imperial College for, doing extractive recycling, actually. Recycling and what I'm going to present now, I don't know what can you see my screen now?
Yes, Dr. Guillermo, your screen is visible. I would request you to just move a little nearer to the microphone. You would be a little more audible. Yeah.
Good. Yes, I don't know, the microphone, I have it here under my throat, but if you can you hear now better? Okay.
Yeah, it's better, though a little more near the microphone.
Okay, I will try here then.
Yeah, better. Thank you.
Okay, so what I will try to present is an overview of waste, waste minimization, what as it was called some time ago, and now it is somehow shifting into other names, like in this case, circular economy. And as we see the title of this webinar, an index of failed economy theory, that sounds very interesting, but yes, we have to produce waste. That is unavoidable, as Mr. Sodiki said, it's unavoidable, and what we will try to do is to produce less waste, and also the waste we produce to handle it properly. This is the standard, more or less, diagram of circular economy, but where the use part is not very much stressed as it should be. The reduction of use, which is highlighted with yellow. We have been working on the other fields, and hopefully we will be working more, but now it is so far that way. So when we analyze the kind of projects that are in the world at waste for waste management. For the UNDP cases, we have this large example of India, and we have another UNDP project in China, which works on the toxic side of the scales. But both of them we see are at the end of pipe side. We should start shifting into the prevention side. That is the reduction of use, the reduction of amounts, the reduction of many things. Of course, I cannot uh, uh, preach or teach to a country like India how to save resources. I know you are very careful. At one point, I was involved in a project in Cuba, and I told them, "You have to teach me how to save resources." So as we advance, we know all know these types of figures. Although the presentation is most focused on plastic, but I have been working or waste or is also produced in many other materials types. In this case, this is the figure it has been managed, 430 million tons per year. This is the most recent figure, production of plastic waste. But if we pay attention to the part that goes to nature, over 60 million tons. And in that case, also going to the bottom of the table, we can see that the toxic part has been somehow addressed. That's why in this figure, the toxic is marked with red in the four quadrants that I showed. Circular economy, we would say that could account for less than 28%. This is the life cycle of plastic packaging, and also with recent figures in which only if we were strict, only less than 4% goes to recycling. That means to the same use. Downcycling goes to another 10%, and if we wanted to consider as circular economy, incineration and energy recovery, another 14%. But anyway, we should focus on to the unknown, the 32% of that goes into the environment. And as the title of my presentation involved borders, it is reduction should be focused on which border we set. In this case, we set the border of a city, in this case, for instance, Mumbai, as was presented earlier. And as we see it regular is also the product manufacturer, the consumers, that we are all consumers, and the end of life. Some leakage into nature, that we said it was 30% on the average in the world, but we have on the other side the government, which can set the policies for bordering or for containment of this weight. But as we approach closer to this look, we can see this that there is more detail. From the product manufacturer, it goes to the large user that I was looking at Mr. Sodigi's presentation, that he calls them large consumers or first consumers, I think. And then we have also the waste management that is many times not taken into account, the collection, aggregation, and segregation. And on the other hand, we have also the plastic resin producers. If we put it as in three domains, again, for setting more the borders, we have these three large producers, to which extended producer responsibility is a policy to be applied. And we have the small scale use, that is us, and the small commerce, and we have the collection. The yellow section, the upper yellow section, is the social part. The white in the middle is the industrial side, and the green is nature. So the approach in the 94 after the Rio was to work mostly with the industry. This in red letters. But now we have to shift onto the other side. The approach for me, and which I have been working more recently is on the reduction of use. And that can be obtained on the side of society just by awareness and education and policies, and on the industrial side, on the waste management. So to give you an idea, this curve on the left shows the way plastic production has been growing from 1950 when it mostly started, reaching the peak in the 2018 of about 600 billion US dollar, which if we, this is just for the plastic resin producers, and if we consider all the added value for transformation, it may come up to $1 trillion. $1 trillion, and we have the externalities, which so far have not been accounted for as they should be. And this is what it's in dotted line that we don't know still yet. The approximation is that it goes at about 140 billion US dollars externalities. But if we put it as a wealth distribution, since this is an economic webinar, the CEO of a plastic producer earns of the order of this amount, 1.2 million per month, while the Safai artists, who I know, I have been in India, as I said, three times at least, earn around this amount per month. Through the intervention of UNDP's project in this case, the Safai Sati may raise its earnings twice as much, plus the other facilities that are provided to them, very important, but still, and the externalities are slightly reduced too. But still, we have a lot to do in this field. So I would like to leave you with one conclusion on my side, that rather than circular economy and trying to which covers importantly a part of recovery of resources, but still there is more to do, and which is reflected in this conclusion. Less use, less inequality, and less toxics. Less toxics, I pointed out in toxics, the toxic part of plastics, and not only of plastics, but most of waste can have it, in particular e-waste too, that these are the three recommendations I would do. And in this, we could use some of the UNDP ways to work and the strengths. The UNDP has high level advocacy in the government level. It can conduct national scale projects through honest brokerage and also through business models, because policies can do some part of the work, but also the models like the India model, the Swachhata Kendra model, it is a business model that is being shown as a successful. And also UNDP can work through operating capacities. So the recommendations would be to work on projects along integrated value chain, eco-design, which comes from 20 or 25 years ago, and more on the social part would be the targeted awareness and education, and on the policy side, the extended producer responsibility, which should be a must. And this is for action, and I will be glad to answer your questions at the end of this presentation or at the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Guillermo. That was a very insightful presentation, especially the overview of circular economy. I think it was very important to put it in perspective, where exactly we stand in terms of, wealth distribution, inequities, the issue of toxic, especially. Now I move on to the next presentation. We'll be hearing from Ms. Aditi Ramola. She She's a technical director at the International Solid Waste Association, where she manages international projects and partnerships with the UN, provides assistance to ISWA's working groups, and helps develop. Sorry, I just got a message. I'm not. Should I turn off the video? 1 minute and do that. It's too dark.
Yeah, Dharmesh, I think you can turn off the video.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry for that. It's too dark here. I live in a remote village and we have a power failure. Her skills are particularly focused on solid waste management and environmental issues. Aditi holds a master's in environmental technology and international affairs from the Vienna University of Technology. She has several years of experience in the private sector, including at Caterpillar Inc., before joining United Nations Industrial Development Organization, or UNIDO, in the Climate Policy and Networks Unit. Aditi is also passionate about science education and currently leads the ISWA Young Professionals Group Initiative on Education, and is a past 2019 chair of the YPG. In 2016, she helped launch the regional ISWA YPG in India, which will serve as a platform for knowledge exchange, networking, and developing project ideas to bring sound waste management to the country. Over to you, Aditi.
Thank you very much, Dharmesh, for the nice introduction. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. I'd like Samuel to actually present on my behalf because, let me see.
Is the screen visible?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you, Samuel.
I would like to begin the slideshow and would request Aditi to dictate whenever you would want me to move the slide.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. As you heard from Dharmesh, I'm Aditi from ISWA, and I'd actually like to thank Chintan very much for inviting me to present at this interesting webinar series on circular economy. So do check out the next upcoming 4 more webinars that they have planned till December. And before I begin, I would like to tell you a little bit about the organization that I work at. Samuel, next slide, please.
Just a second.
Thank you. So the International Solid Waste Association is a global independent and non-profit association. And ISWA's mission is to promote and develop sustainable, comprehensive, and professional waste management worldwide, while also promoting a transition to a circular economy. And we have members currently from over 110 countries and hopefully expanding into more areas. That's just a little bit about ISWA. Next slide, please. Now, jumping right in. So the topic of this webinar is Waste, an Index of Failed Economic Theory. I was intrigued by the title, and when I was thinking about how to frame my presentation, building upon the fantastic presentations by Dr. Miguel and Mr. Sodhi, I thought that I would focus a bit on the drivers behind the concepts such as circular economy that we are seeing being talked about globally these days. And just I wanted to give you a bit of a background information and a historical background information about how we've come to where we are right now in terms of our conversation and so on and so forth. So from the turn of the 20th century, so almost 120 years ago, or even before that, and into the 1950s, first starting in the United States, after the World War II, their economy just took off. And then globally as well, waste began to increase in tonnage, volumes, in toxicity, and it became more complex. You have heterogeneous products, multi-layered products. You have products that are more complex than even ever before. And it also started to play a pivotal role as an industrial strategy for growth and profit. So the trends are basically rising population together with rising purchasing power, which is leading to a rise in consumption. And the growth, as we've seen, I mean, there's been a lot of research done on this. The growth is still more or less proportional to the GDP of the countries or the regions. Let's see what happens after this COVID pandemic passes, but at least till now, that's been the case. And just to let you know, I mean, we most of what we've talked about today has been focusing on municipal solid waste. But actually, out of all the waste that's generated, about more than 90% of that is actually industrial solid waste, and municipal solid waste just forms a very small percentage of the waste that's produced. And usually what comes to mind when we think of solid waste or waste is MSW. And depending on where you are, because waste is such a local issue, anywhere from about 1/3 to 2/3 of municipal solid waste, or MSW, is organic waste. And it's made up of food scraps, also yard trimmings, garden waste, and so on and so forth. And the rest of this waste is, as you saw also in the other presentations, it's basically recyclables. It could be paper, plastics, aluminum, textiles, household hazardous, and so on and so forth. Of course, packaging is a big part of it now as well. So waste is actually an indicator, or it indicates a level of consumption, but it also reflects inequity in access to wealth. So, the more the wealth, as I said, that link is still there. I don't know how it's going to be after this pandemic, but more the wealth, the more you're producing waste. And to achieve a truly circular economy, which I'll come to the concepts a little later, we need to tackle both these factors. Next slide, please. So just again, since I was just following the two fantastic presentations, I'm giving you more of a background kind of discussion point of view. I want to talk about this 3-pillar approach to sustainability. So when the discussions on sustainable development began in the late 1980s, to help put things into perspective, people started looking at this we also started looking at the planetary boundaries. We have a resource limited planet, and we need to actually reconnect to our biosphere and respect the planetary boundaries, because for too long we've actually looked at the environment as just an externality for economic progress, and something that we can just keep exploiting with limitless stock and so on and so forth. So we need to shift from this perception where we are, people are separate from the planet, and we need to look at it in a holistic fashion. And sustainability, of course, is not just about renewable energy and energy efficiency. It's actually, you need to have an understanding of the connections between, as you see on your left, environment, society, economy. And a popular method of considering this whole paradigm is actually this 3-pillar approach, and it's most popularly depicted in a Venn diagram, which you see on the left. And on the right-hand side, you actually see which is a better way to look at it. It's 3 concentric circles, where you have environment right at the top, because it is, everything else sits within that. Excuse me. And you see that society comes on top of that, and economy sits within a society. So to have a healthy society, all these 3 things, or to have a healthy blend of all these things, have to all be in balance with each other. And so they can't exist. A healthy economy cannot exist without a healthy and just society, and so on. I don't want to get into too much of it, but even an equitable society and so on. Next slide, please. Thank you. So now getting into the topic a little bit, like costs and benefits of waste-related activities. So in an economic sense, it is usually the municipal and state governments or city governments that account for the cost of damage that the waste causes to local environments, because they decide how to deal with the waste. But this cost, but this cost is not already part of the price of goods or services that produce waste. At least traditionally, they haven't been. And economists define this problem as negative externality, and I will come back to this concept in a little bit. And externalities, according to, again, economists, are basically any sort of benefit or cost that's placed on a third party without compensation. And I want to very briefly look at, you could have environmental externalities, social, economic. So for instance, risk of contamination of soils and water, for instance, for the environmental aspects, not taking into account the whole life cycle of a product could also impact the environment negatively, and so on. In the social aspect, I mean, there's a lot more, but I'm just giving you a few examples here. If you don't have equitable resource distribution, you don't have a just society. Also, the more the generation of waste volumes, or as the waste volumes go up, the more the cost of waste disposal. And in terms of economic externalities, you can also be looking at the cost of waste generation and treatment. So all those producers that are free riding in the system, or any costs that are basically not part of the cost already, has to be taken into account. So hidden costs have to be accountable. Next slide, please. So just briefly, in economic theory, as I don't know what the what the participants look like today, but if you've done a little bit of economics, you've seen there are several kinds of market failures. And market failure basically just means it's a situation where markets haven't, fairly allocated or haven't allocated resources efficiently. And here I've listed many, many examples of, perceived market failures, and several of them actually might even apply to waste mismanagement or the improper management of waste. For instance, demerit goods, or you can even talk about unstable markets and so on and so forth. But right now I want to focus on negative externalities. And as I had said before, negative externalities are basically, or externalities are basically the cost when they are not applying to the cost of something that is not applied to a third party without compensation. So that's what it is. And in order to reduce market failures, governments, on the right hand column, you can see governments actually have two basic strategies to use to overcome these market failures. So they can use legislation or regulation, or they can use the price mechanism. Next slide, please. So a negative effect of an economic transaction that is not accounted for in the price of that transaction can happen within waste management as well. And for instance, an environmental impact of environmental impact of mismanaging waste is basically the externality of a product or service if it's not accounted for in the price of that product or service. So when waste is not properly managed, it could lead to following externalities. Again, this is just a subset of many examples that exist. For instance, human health and the environment. It can lead to resource depletion, methane emissions, black carbon emissions of open burning, transportation of waste, and so on and so forth, contamination of soils and waters, and so on and so forth. So proper waste management can be a positive externality for free riders or other stakeholders who benefit directly from these services. Next slide, please. So I want to just briefly touch upon some historical background in the next few slides. The diagram that you actually see on the screen right now is called the waste hierarchy, and it was described as part of the directive by the European Parliament and Council way back in 2008. And this is a piece of legislation as a means to deal with waste. The waste hierarchy sets the basic concepts and definitions related to waste management. It defines what recycling is, what recovery is. It explains when waste ceases to be waste and becomes secondary raw material, and so on and so forth. It talks about how you distinguish between byproducts, what is waste, and so on. So the directive applies to basically the countries that are part of the European Union, and it lays down basic principles that have to be part of local legislation as well. So usually what happens is the EU Council or the Parliament makes the regulation, and it has to then be contextualized in each member state. And it talks about, so the thoughts already start to come, the 3 hours or the 4 hours or how many 5, 6, 7 hours you want to talk about. You see right at the top part of the hierarchy is telling you prevention is what we want to look for, then come to reuse, recycling, recovery, disposal. And you can see already how the concept of circular thinking is already being established right here through this piece of legislation. Next slide, please. Now, sort of jumping a little bit back and forth, want to talk about extended producer responsibility. Both the earlier presenters have actually referred to this concept, and I just wanted to go give a little bit more detail about this. And what EPR basically is, it was actually proposed by a Swedish economist, I believe, Mr. Lindqvist, in 1990. And it's defined as, or it's basically understood as an environmental policy approach in which a producer's responsibility for a product is extended beyond the consumer stage of a product's lifestyle. So let's talk about, say, which was one of the first EPR system schemes that was introduced in the world. So suppose you finished using your cell phone, the producer is responsible to then take care of it till the end of disposal, or after its life cycle is over with you. So as a consumer, once you're done with it, it becomes the property or the responsibility of the producer. And basically, it's moving away, it's involving a shift in responsibility. So it could be administrative, financial, or physical, away from governments or municipalities or even consumers to producers. As well, it's encouraging producers to take environmental considerations into account, and so they put into thinking some design and manufacturing phases of the product development. And so EPR is seeking to achieve a reduction in environmental impact of products throughout their whole lifespan. And as I said, it's been applied to and it's been applied now to paper packaging, plastic, all sorts of plastics, cans, and so on and so forth. And it can be seen as a mechanism by which people are actually applying the polluter pays principle, which is a very strong principle that needs to be always looked into when we establish such systems. So in a capitalistic market, the cost of disposing of a product is, after its useful lifetime, has not been historically considered in the price. And hopefully with good EPR systems, this starts to change. Next slide, please. One thing to just note as well is that EPR schemes are not the only way to address externalities caused by mismanagement or improper waste management. You can also have things like deposit return schemes. So, sometimes you have like a 5-cent deposit or, some pesos a deposit on a plastic bottle and so on and so forth, which basically is, it's re-establishing the value of recyclables. So then you bring that back into the system and a systems thinking. This slide, I don't want to put too much emphasis on because it has already been talked about. The Sustainable Development Goals were agreed upon by all member states of the UN, except for one, ratified by all except for one in 2015. And they are basically universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity by 2030. So they're also known as the global goals or the 2030 agenda. And these 17 goals are all integrated. So they might look, you talk about poverty reduction, you talk about, or basically end poverty, you talk about production and consumption and so on. So there's 17 of them, but they're all interrelated, and waste touches almost all of these. As you saw, Mr. Guillermo was saying, Mr. Sodhi was also saying 14 of them touch, but I think almost all of these touch, waste touches all these SDG goals. Next slide, please. So this is a very famous kind of a diagram. I mean, you've seen what was like a linear economy became a recycling economy, is now moving towards a circular economy. And so historical data indicates that in most industrialized countries, there is a direct relationship between waste generation and economic activity. And as I said, the GDP has been closely linked so far. And but we don't know how it's going to move forward after this year or till the pandemic is over. And so where do we want to go next? The concept of circular economy has become very popular. We see a lot of debate about it, a lot of activity towards it. EU, in fact, had like a whole program just funding projects based on circular economy and so on. So we need to start looking at systems. I mean, it's becoming fairly obvious that we have to start looking at systems that move away from a take, make, use to a more recycling economy, which we already sort of are in many parts of the world, to a circular economy, which basically promotes a take, make, use, recycle, reuse, refurbish, repair, and so on and so forth. So your materials stay for a much longer time in the system. So it's a regenerative economy, and it respects the natural boundaries of the planet. Excuse me. Next slide, please. Again, I don't want to focus too much time here. This is a diagram that if you've been in the conversations about circular economy, you must have seen this. It's also called the butterfly diagram because of the shape. You can see the circles and the loops, basically the circularity loops. This diagram was actually made by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and their definition of circularity states that a circular economy seeks to rebuild capital, whether this is financial, manufactured, and it ensures enhanced flows of goods and services. So the diagram is basically what it's doing is it's illustrating the continuous flow of technical and biological materials through the system, through the value circle. Next slide, please. So just briefly, so if we come to a thinking of waste, moving away from what we define as waste to more towards resources, you can see within our system, within our waste systems, there are ways to bring back or take back or put back into our ecosystem materials that otherwise would just go either to landfills or open dump sites and so on. So just giving you just a few examples here. You have, if you do composting if you manage your bio waste correctly or properly, you can get compost, which can act as biofertilizers. And as you all know, we have, soil is one of the most scarce resources in the world. It takes almost 100 years to actually to generate about a cubic centimeters of good soil. And we're also very fast losing the fertility of it. And also we're seeing desertification happen in a lot of places. And so composting or managing bio waste correctly could help overcome that. We can also look at within, so bulk of MSW, if you look in very developed or high income countries, is construction demolition waste. So if you recycle that correctly, you might bring back construction or building materials, and you could take raw materials to replace virgin materials. So for instance, instead of cement, you can use recycled construction demolition waste. Obviously it's not always applicable, but where we can, it's best to do that. We can also use our waste as energy source. So if you have good, I'm not at all saying that we should, but if we do, we can get electricity out of incineration. So we have waste to energy technologies and so on. All of these exist. Next slide, please. I'll hurry up. I think I'm sort of running out of time here. One other concept that I wanted to mention here is urban mining. And over decades, we've actually accumulated a huge amount of, or enormous amount of wealth, which is hidden because we are surrounded by man-made or anthropogenic stock of over, they estimated to be about 50 billion tons of materials. And much of it basically is in buildings, it's in our infrastructure, installations, consumer goods, and so on. And in high income economies, this anthropogenic material stock is basically growing by a further 10 tons per inhabitant every year. And so it basically represents a substantial resource for future generations. And but it's been previously inaccessible. We haven't looked at it as a resource, but resource poor countries are starting to look at these methodologies a lot more. And so you have like steel, copper, aluminum. You can go into minute details of extracting this material from the urban anthroposphere. So if you can start looking at those systems, that's another way to come to a circular economy. The last few slides I want to, if you can move on to the next slide, please. The last few slides, it's the elephant in the room. COVID-19, I cannot not say something about that. COVID-19 has struck all countries since the beginning of 2020. And what we are seeing that after a period of rapid economic growth, some economies have now been pushed into recession. And several countries now across the globe are struggling to contain the spread. In fact, the second or third wave of the epidemic. And this is basically leading to a decline in economic activity. So that's why I kept saying, because GDP has so far been linked, increased GDP with waste production, waste generation. So we'll see what happens next. So this crisis is quite unprecedented because it basically combines a fall in global demand, tighter financial conditions, and a major supply shock. So we will see what happens next. But in the waste sector, what we're seeing, if you go back to the previous slide, please. In the waste sector, what we're seeing is that some waste streams have gone up and there's been decrease in some other waste streams. And so what you do see has been like an increase in PPE, a lot of personal protective equipment being used, masks and so on. And there's a picture right on the screen, a man holding up what has been washed onto beaches. So you already see that it's reached the oceans as well, which is not a good sign at all. But it's been also hard for many urban local bodies to actually maintain basic urban services of just waste collection and so on and so forth, which is an essential service at the moment. And we need to recognize that. Next slide, please. So it's not all doom and gloom, because we will overcome this. We don't know when, but we will. People are working hard to get the vaccines and the medicines on time. But whatever the long-term impacts of the pandemic will be, some of the key principles will never change. They will remain a constant, and they become actually even more important at this time. So for instance, ensuring a high level of protection of human health and environment. There was actually some things I wanted to also say previously, which I didn't mention, because over time, our legislation, waste management began because it was affecting human health at the beginning, about 150 years ago in, say, New York or in some countries in Europe. And then the drivers for that became environmental pollution. We said, okay, no, we need to manage waste because of environmental pollution. Now we see trends like climate change, we see trends like marine litter. So there's always a driver or a trend that's pushing our policies and regulation, and circular economy is hopefully going to be the one that's going to be more sustainable for our systems that are in place. And also to fully utilize our resources is basically important for us to also remember. These are just very basic principles. We have to do separation at source because otherwise the value goes down. It's much better for recyclables that come out of MSW that they be collected and sorted separately so that the contamination levels are low. And finally, the last 2 points, we want to think globally but act locally. Waste is a very local issue, as I said, and things more global issues like climate change and so on and so forth need a coordinated global response, but we need to look at local systems in place. And it's big. It's part of a bigger system. It's not a separate entity, so we have to have a holistic view for deploying before we deploy any solutions or technologies. And so that's my last slide. I'm here for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Aditi. It was a very interesting presentation. I'm almost obliged to reflect upon the work of Donella and Dennis Meadows, Limits to Growth, because I think what we're facing now is in many ways kind of was predicted back then. We have limits, and the planet has limited resources. So I think the circular economy calls for that kind of a shift in thinking. We have to start thinking in systems, which is what I think you also said in your presentation. We have to be conscious of the natural systems that govern every aspect of our life, both economic and social, because ultimately we're part of the planet Earth. And I think the linear model is in many ways a market failure. And it is in many ways also self-devouring because it is not sustaining, it's eating itself. And all these other issues we're facing right now, including the COVID crisis, because it has been linked to the loss of biodiversity. A lot of these pandemics and in the future as well, and including research by WHO has linked this to biodiversity loss. So in many ways, it is all kind of linked. So I think what we need to do is also look at what Dr. Guillermo said. He gave a very interesting overview on the spirit behind the circular economy. His whole reflection on the issue of toxics is very, very important. It's a key element in circular economy, I think. But it's not talked about much because the circular economy discussion is mainly dominated by recycling. And that, I think, is a very limited way of thinking or reflecting on the idea of circular economy. Because what we have toxics in our products, then we're going to get toxics out of the recycling, the products that we make out of it. So it's in many ways, as long as toxics are in the system, we'll be poisoning the circular economy. We cannot have a clean circular economy. Because I come from a background of incineration, and I have worked and seen many communities that live near incinerators. And also as a concept, incineration and cement incineration, co-incineration, which is very popular in India, has somehow made its way into the circular economy debate. But these are not what they are. These are end of pipeline solutions. These are interventions that destroy resources and in many ways are an antithesis to the core thinking behind circular economy. So as practitioners or as policymakers, I think we have to look at these interventions as a interim arrangement, but incineration cannot be an inherent part of circular economy as things progress or as the society moves forward. We have to imagine circular economy without such technologies, and ultimately reimagine the way we make things, shift from design for the dump model to sustainable, manufacturing, which is something that Dr. Guillermo also touched upon. The Mumbai Swachhata Kendra discussion presentation by Mr. Sodhi could be that first step in the process. But ultimately, companies in such partnerships will have to develop business models that aim at reduction instead of management, because ultimately this is a overproduction problem. We have too much plastics out there, and corporations that or the manufacturers, the product producers have to reimagine packaging business packaging models. That businesses have to rethink the way they reach their products to the end consumer. So a lot of thinking has to be done in that direction. Ultimately, I think it's about reduction and toxics. I think, to me, that kind of struck at the heart of the whole issue. So I think that I wanted to sum it up with a few of these points. If questions have started coming in from the audience, then I think we should start taking them.
Thanks a lot, Dharmesh. I'll take it from you now. Once again, I'll thank all the panelists, and we've had a great audience. I've got a huge amount of questions with me, so I'll not waste any time and begin. My first question is addressed to Aditi. So this question has been asked by Mr. Samir Gaikwad. He's an experienced designer. So he asks that circular economy creates a great system to deal with the result, although how do creators, makers satisfy the capitalist world and drift away from creating more and more? How does one tackle the root issue of planned obsolescence?
That's a good point. Thank you very much. I was actually going to mention planned obsolescence in my talk as well, but I think I exceeded my time limit. I don't have an answer to that because it's a complex question, and which we'll probably have to have many hours of debate and discussion to even get to the start of how to look at it. But if I had to say something really simplistic, would be to perhaps look at regulation and enforcement of that regulation. For instance, if you make it impossible for producers to move away from their responsibility, or if you can have good EPR systems. I mean, EPR by itself or in principle sounds really good. It's not easy to implement those systems in practice though. And I would say planned obsolescence needs to be, I think the nail should be hit on the head. Producers should be told, well, no, you cannot be doing this because you have to either take back this, either elongate the usefulness of your product, the life of the product, or it's up to you. If you want to have an iPhone only last for 3 years, then it's your problem to then actually deal with the waste management side of it. And I think it's not even that. I mean, I think as humanity, we're all coming to realize that we're all in this together. So it basically hurts everybody, even if the systems don't work. So I think we're moving away from that. As I said, it's not an easy answer and I don't have one, but this is what I can say.
All right, thanks a lot for the honesty, Aditi. We do have one more question for you, which is, you mentioned PPE waste in your presentation, and Dr. Neelam Jain, who is an associate professor in the Department of Biotechnology from Amity University, Rajasthan, asks us, what is the fate of PPE waste in the current scenario? What is the waste management hierarchy for PPE waste? What is currently being done for this?
That also is a very good question. So some parts of the world, of course, are looking at it. So if PPE is coming out of, say, hospitals, that's basically being dealt with as medical waste, healthcare waste. Otherwise, it's just being dealt with in the manner of a municipal or household hazardous waste. So it's not being treated any differently, which of course puts the waste workers at risk. But you also have to see the volumes. They're just enormous, and you never know which household actually has something that should be treated as, medical waste, or people just discarding masks that they just used and they actually are not ill. So it's being dealt with in both ways in different parts of the world.
All right, thanks for that. Moving on to the next set of questions. Dr. Guillermo, I would request you to unmute yourself. I have one question for you. So, is there a market for recycled plastics in Mexico? And how is the situation when it comes to the recycling bit over there, and the preference of recycled plastics as compared to virgin plastics over there?
Thank you for the question. Yes, very specific. Well, market in Mexico for plastic waste is as everywhere else, I think. Depends on the quality and the classification. So, of course, PET will have, as we all know, has a higher price. So there is a market. For the other plastics, it is just this market for downcycling, mostly for to producing boards or that kind of thing. So, and the cost or the raw material, of course, it is also slightly under the cost of virgin materials, particularly for PET.
All right. Thank you for that, Dr. Guillermo. So I have another question for which was asked again by, I'm sorry, I didn't mention the name. So the previous question was asked by Miss Druhi, who is a PhD student at the University of Manchester. She addresses another question, but this time it's to Mr. Sodhi. Mr. Sodhi, I would request you to unmute yourself. So the question is, do you think there is a need to improve current recycling technologies in order to move closer to the goal of circular economy? Or is that not an issue in India right now?
So thank you very much for the questions. Please, I've been seeing in the chat box, there are many, and I've been trying to answer some of them. Going to this question, there is an ample need in the recycling industry to have the technologies being brought into. There are a mix of technologies which are being brought into, and in the MRFs, that is the question you're asking.
Well, I'll just repeat the question once again. So
just repeat the question.
Yeah, Druhi asks us, do you think there is a need to improve current recycling technologies in order to move closer?
Right. Got it. So the current recycling technologies within the system, firstly, one needs to understand the recycling sector. The recycling sector in India is largely in the informal space. There are large companies also recycling. They are also huge in number, and more investments are coming in the country in terms of startups on recycling. And there is enough and ample space for both the players to coexist. There is larger players and startups which are coming with latest technologies and bringing in the circularity aspects. They are removing the ink. If I have to give an example of Banyan Nation, and they are trying to bring it from bottle to bottle. But there are other recyclers in the downstream who are the small recyclers who are using in their house space and taking PPE or HDPE, LDPE, and then starting to produce granules which are not taking care of the dust factors into it, the LAID policy guideline. So that's where the investments need to go in. And that's what we are trying to do. We are trying to create these decentralized small MRFs, which can be in plenty. And we are trying to take care that how these small technologies, both manual and mechanically segregations, can really help to reduce the dust factor and give a flip to the recycling industry and create investment. So there is a mix of this to talk, and it will take a lot of time to go into the details of it. But I also want to add one thought on PPE kits, which you asked earlier to Aditi. I don't know how and why these PPE kits are coming forward of the polypropylene ethylene kits. And I don't know why these are being used, because this is a single time use. You just use it and throw it. A person is using and throwing it one a day. I wish it doesn't happen more than one a day, because there are billions of them coming into the stream. Billions every day in India. I don't think we should get into the polypropylene use of polypropylene based masks, why they are being brought into it. Cloth masks are easy and they can be reused, and it creates into the reduction system. Over to you.
So I would like to ask one question to all the panelists, and this is a question which has been asked by one of our previous panelists in the previous talk, which is Dr. Manbir Sodhi. So he asks, how can India's labor pool be efficiently used for improving sustainability? It's open to anybody. I would request Ms. Aditi, Mr. Prabjot, Dr. Guillermo, anybody of you would like to take this?
Okay, let me come first in trying to say how we are addressing this. So, there is a very strong, thanks, Mr. Sodhi. We share the same name, back end of the name. So what we are trying to do here is we are trying to integrate these Swachhta Sathis or Safai Sathis, which we call, and create a wage market for them and a better job security, because you can't throw them out of the window. They are the ones who are very active in a country like India and many other developing world countries. So how to use them sustainably is to give them in their hands a better placement of segregation and reuse of recycling of those little plastics which they are collecting, so that they can earn a better wage rate for them. Now, if you go to what is the present system of using them? So the labor pool today is collecting all this. I showed you in the slide, and they are going through scrap dealers, a whole chain in the ecosystem, and wholesalers, and then finally to the recycler. These intermediaries are cutting their profits, and they are cutting in a huge way. Guillermo already has brought out the facts that how the project is really bringing the change in terms of incomes for them. We have seen that more than 25% of the plastic which they bring in is being deducted when they are coming to sell to these scrap dealers, because contamination hai, usme pani hai, there is water in it, there is contamination in it, and we will pay you only this much whether you want it or not, and we will pay you after 3 days or 5 days or 7 days, and if you want cash now, then I'll deduct 50%. So, that sort of an exploitative measure is what we need to overcome. And the labor pool has to be brought into the system. Today, we are recognizing this very labor pool, and we are putting them across the window and felicitating them and acknowledging their contribution as thank you, Safai Sathis, in the country as a whole, as waste warriors, as they are said. So I think so. A little maneuverability in making to the local conditions and understanding this whole show, because this chain plastic, as Dharmesh also said, I also mentioned that more and more consumption of plastic is coming. Just imagine the role of a ULB, where they have no control on the waste incoming. They have no control on the consumption, and they have still to be tasked with to manage that. And higher expenditures are increasing. Populations are increasing in the cities. So there is enough a challenge for them. Each city in the country, in India, more than 40% is the informal sector population, which is adding to wipe off the waste we are generating. And they are trying to find ways in order to really meet it sustainably. They also want to live a better lifestyle. They also want their children to be educated. They also want the health to be accessible to them. You ask any waste picker, I'm there in this sector for the last 20 years in the informal sector. You ask any waste picker, what is your dream? I don't want my child to get into this, but I have no choice. How can you help me? One of the waste pickers said to me, number of times, many waste pickers have said to me, सरदार जी चले मत जाना, अभी हमें आप बना रहे हो ग्रुप्स में, इसमें बाद में छोड़ के मत चले जाना हमें. Please don't leave us right in the midstream. Now you are investing with us. Please be with us for the time till we do not reach that level of sustainability to manage ourselves more happily and happily. Over to you.
Right. So we have a set of questions which I found out are on the topics of plastics. Now, I feel very glad to announce it to everybody that our next webinar, which is on the 9th of November, it's titled, What Shall We Make of the Plastics Challenge in the Era of Circular Economy? As Ms. Aditi pointed out, the term EPR was coined by Dr. Thomas Lindquist, and he would be a panelist in that particular webinar. So I would just name out all the three questions which are on the topic of plastics, but due to the paucity of time, maybe we could address them in that particular webinar. This has been asked by Manvi, who is a program advisor at FES India. She asks how to bring in the plastic manufacturers or product manufacturers in the loop presented in the Mumbai case study. Then the second question is on the topic of Coca-Cola and other beverage manufacturers, asked by Ripu Daman Bevli, who is the founder at Litter Free India and Bloggers of India. We have a special webinar, which is the 6th webinar, where this particular question will be addressed particularly well. And the final question, which I believe I would again point out to Dr. Sodhi, because that's on the topic of the UNDP initiative, which incorporates a plastic credit mechanism for optimizing better resource recovery and monitoring. This has been asked by Pradeep Dadlani from SciComm. Could you just expand a bit on that, Mr. Sodhi?
Yeah. So, this is a good question. In fact, I was going through all your questions and I'll put them all together and take a few minutes if I'm giving the opportunity. Now, you see, what we are doing is in this EPR space, which has come up, I'm also on the committee nationally for drafting the guidelines with CPCB over the last 2 years into this. And Dharmesh has written a lot about it. We have to bring the industry to understand that they really cannot hire PROs and then sort of give them money and then that's the end of the show. They give them the certifications and the certifications need to be clearly seen that how transparent they are. So I would go, we are partnering with Coca-Cola in India. And we are partnering with HUL and HDFC and all also. HDFC is investing through their CSR. They have nothing to do on compliance of plastics. But they see this as an issue and a problem and they want to invest in it, how we can bring back the better efficiency and productivity within the systems. In the UNDP model, we are taking the EPR credit systems through which we are doing the collection, we are doing the segregation, and we are going to recyclers, not only for plastics, for all forms of dry waste. When the commissioner is giving me a space, he is not giving me only to handle plastics. He says, Sodhi, sara dry waste karna hai. All the dry waste has to be handled, which may be glass, leather, cloth, or whatsoever. And we are linking and finding those to go to the respective recyclers so as to reduce the pressure on landfills. The lesser the landfill, the more it is good for us and we move to a zero waste economy. So here we are investing that money in link with the ULBs. I would very strongly, and I have been advocating very strongly that every manufacturer, whether he works through model number 1, 2 or 3 PROs or directly through this, has to invest in a partnership with the ULBs which have been mandated there. And there has to be a certification process going through the ULBs that this particular waste has been collected and this has been going to this supply chain management for recycling. Second thing which I've been very strongly saying, which Pradeep is asking, and we've met a couple of times here and there, is the issue of manufacturers of resin. Why in the country the resin manufacturers should be left out from the regime of the producer responsibility? I don't think they need to really come down into the sharing of the benefits with the brand owners and the producers. And the definitions are a little bit brought into the latest guidelines, but they will be further rectified. Resin manufacturer all over the country, in the world, whether it is for plastic or other sectors also, if mining companies can be taxed for the mining that they are doing, similarly, the resin manufacturers should also be brought under some financial instrument where it may be 1 paisa per kg. But this is loud and clear that they are a part of this show and they should be really asked to also invest into the system of bringing back. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sodhi, and thank you all the panelists. Thank you, Aditi. Thank you, Professor Guillermo, and our wonderful moderator, Dharmesh. It's been a pleasure attending this session and having all of you. And of course, thanks to all our audience for being so participative. It's been lovely having you.